And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
Hello and welcome to season 2 of my podcast Against the Grain, where we explore all things crop circles, UFOs and ancient mysteries. Season 1 was a great success. If you haven't checked out all the episodes on there, I seriously urge you to go and have a look. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and YouTube. Had some great guests in season 1, Scott Onstott, Karen Alexander, UFO researcher and activist Steve Bassett, Chrissy Newton from The Debrief, Peter Vandenberg. Some great guests. If you haven't checked them out yet, please go and do so. And in season 2, I'm not going to go on for that long this time. We will do episodes of no more than an hour. And if we do go on, because some of the guests have got quite a lot to say, then I'll split them into 2 episodes so that you can spread the love, as it were. In season 2, I've got some great guests lined up already. We've got Gary S. Bobroff, the author of Crop Circles, Jung and the Reemergence of the Archetypal Feminine. I have Veronica Goodchild lined up. She wrote the great book on crop circles called Songlines for the Soul. Veteran researcher Lucy Pringle is going to be joining us, plus some others that I've got in the pipeline, special guests which I'm sure you're going to enjoy. Tonight, though, I have with me Mr. Dan Vidler. Dan has been around the crop circles for more than 20 years, a great friend, has given numerous presentations on his speciality, which is the ground lay of the crop. Now, Dan became directly involved with the crop circle phenomenon back in 2003 when he visited his first formation at Newmarket Hill in Sussex. Noticing intricate details in the laid crop in a subsequent crop circle at Sompting only a week later, Dan felt a calling, drawn to investigating crop circles at ground level and documenting this aspect of the phenomenon. Since then, and after visiting many formations over 2 decades' work, Dan has become ever more convinced that the origins of most crop circles are a mystery. Dan's recently published book, Crop Circles, Layers of Mystery, provides an accessible guide to the features found within crop circles, features which, in his opinion, provide further evidence for why this phenomenon is not a hoax. Now, if you haven't seen this book already, I seriously urge you to go on Amazon and check it out. There will be links in the description below, and we will be going through some of the fantastic images that are spread all through this book throughout this presentation. So, without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to introduce Mr. Dan Vidler. Dan, thanks so much for joining me. Really great to see you. How you been?
Very well, thanks. Yeah. Good. Yeah, nice to be here.
I've been. It's nice to see you. I've been ploughing through your latest, your first book on crop circles, isn't it? And when I was messaging you to get you on the show a little while ago, and you were saying you were working feverishly to finish the book, I can understand why. There's quite a tome, isn't it? You've got lots of fantastic images in there, and you've really done a great piece of work there.
I appreciate your feedback. Thank you. Yeah, it's not. I feel like the intention was it wasn't going to be too heavy on the reading. It says everything I want to say, but the images speak for themselves often, don't they? And hopefully, the balance of text with images gives people a sort of clear picture of everything we've been seeing for like a long time.
Long time, yeah. I mean, I've not read it to the end yet, but I've flicked through and picked out bits, and I've read Andy Thomas's great introduction. Always good to have someone like Andy, the veteran researcher Andy, to give you a great introduction like that.
And it is as I've said in the book, it's a bit of background to my involvement in it, but also with Andy, in that he was there at my very first crop circle with Alan Brown. A chance encounter by the side of the road, but to have Andy write the foreword to the book, if you'll excuse the pun, sort of comes full circle for me.
And I got Alan coming on the show shortly as well, so Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that because he's always been a bit of a hero of mine with the work he's done with Crooked Solely and some of the other
Ah,
bits and pieces he's done over the Square and the Circle. It's just awesome, isn't it?
brilliant stuff, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. Well, I was very lucky to
Yeah, it
see the
really
two of
is.
those, in that lay-by 2003. What a combination.
Absolutely. I mean, you said it was seemingly fated, didn't you? You said this, it felt like it when you've looked back on it. And I think you're absolutely right. These things do tend to work like that, don't they?
Yeah, oh, absolutely felt like that. Still does. A lot of things within this phenomenon, our involvement in it, do seem to work like that, don't they?
They
Things
really
happen.
do. Is that what you meant when you said synchronicities? Is that what you were talking about? Or was there any other synchronicities that kind of led you into it?
There's a bit more background with Andy and Karen in their work in 1995. They did a sort of, what's the best way of summarizing it? A piece of work involving communication with the circle making phenomenon, so to speak, which
Hmm.
there's a lot of detail to that, as everyone might imagine. The short story is that piece of work culminated in a formation appearing, seemingly in response to their meditations and the channeling that had gone on, which were where they had done that was further south to where I lived, but the formation that appeared in the village where I lived from my whole childhood, and that it just seems amazing. I didn't know about it then. I was 16, but I cycled past that field. I believe that I crossed the energy line from where they had done that piece of work to the field. I crossed over that because I crossed a path that was in between, but right next to the field, 50 times, 100 times that summer, without knowing it was there. But
Without
but
knowing
I
it.
do think that process had an effect on me, which is the long term of that is why I'm sitting here talking to you now. I think it went in despite me not knowing about it.
20 years later, here you
Yeah,
are.
exactly. Yeah.
And so when you got involved, tell me about the stigma. Okay. How did you get on? How did you broach this with your family, friends? How did they react to you getting involved in this? How did you handle it? Because you've always come across to me as this kind of like, you're a school teacher,
Yeah.
right? And you've always seemed to me to be this level-headed guy that seems to be so cool around it all. But from my own experience, I know that it's something of a hero's journey, really, because you're going to get stick for mentioning that you're involved in these things. How have you dealt with that?
I think you're right in the person I am is just a down-to-earth mainstream person of the world.
Yeah.
It's and so what I've often talked about is not necessarily that wider aspect of life, but I think it is a bit of that. I sort of hope, and I think it happens occasionally, that the way I am outside of crop circles, say, or alongside it, perhaps adds a bit of weight to the fact that I'm saying it, because an average person rightly doesn't view me from the outside as someone with alternative beliefs or an alternative lifestyle, and I'm not saying that's
Yes.
those are bad things at all, but I don't live and breathe those aspects of the wider world, and so then when I
Yes.
say this is going on and it's a genuine mystery, there's almost like I don't know. For some people, I think perhaps that's been a bit more believable. Certainly, friends and family, sort of take it as well. there's not a lot of for in a close with close friends and family. I don't think anyone's ever questioned the authenticity of what we're describing. And then beyond that, with for example, work colleagues or people who I don't know as well, I think it's the same thing. People do know that I'm fairly down to earth, so they sort of understand that this must be a thing if I'm talking about it in a matter of fact way, which is what I've probably always done. And then further afield again, I think when you broaden that, there are other people who perhaps I know for quite a long time, but it doesn't come up in conversation. I don't go out of my way to push it on people is probably the wrong description, but if they know that I'm into it, I talk about it for the whole day. If people aren't bored, you know what that's like. You get on it, and then if people are interested, we could talk for weeks, couldn't we? But I don't necessarily instigate that in too strong a way, you know.
And that's great. I admire that, because I wasn't like that in the initial stages. I was blown away by it all, and I guess I became something of a manic street preacher and had to learn the hard way that this is just, I'm just bouncing up against a brick wall here if I come across in that way. And I wasn't alternative, as you know. Yeah. I came from a different sort of much more straight-laced background with law and private investigation companies and stuff like that. And so, but it was an alternative thing for me, and it took me a while to get grounded, good few years to get really grounded with it. And then now, I recently changed branch from where I work, and I've been there about 3-4 months now. And I was chatting to a guy just a couple of days ago, and over lunch, and mentioned the podcast, and he said, what's that about then? And I told him, and he said, "What are they a thing?" And I said, "Yeah." And he could tell that I really I wasn't attached to trying to convince him. And it does bridge that gap, doesn't it? It does make them go, "Oh, this guy's he's not being a Jehovah's Witness to me," or, no disrespect to Jehovah's Witnesses, but they can come across a bit pushy sometimes. He's not trying to convince me, he's not trying to convert me, and it does create that bridge, doesn't it? To let people go and look for themselves.
Yeah, that's one of the main or best things, isn't it? To sort of open people's eyes to the fact that it's there, it's real, it's current, and then to some degree make of it what you will, perhaps alongside the fact that my belief is that we're looking at a mystery, and
a mystery, and that's another aspect of it, isn't it? If you don't come out with any certain answers and you just say, I have no idea what's doing it, but I can tell you that I don't think many of them are made by people. I think some people do make some, but I think the rest of it's a large mystery that comes across as.
Yeah, and well, you've just summarised the first sort of 2 or 3 sentences of the book. I think that I start by saying, if you think you're going to find the answers in here, I don't know them. So let's be clear right now. And we love that. It's true, isn't it? I just don't. People. That's the thing. I think we spoke about this at the symposium maybe last year briefly, but everyone, if they know you've been in it a while, or that you're interested in it, or I hesitate to say knowledgeable, but we've seen a few things. People on the whole find it very hard to understand how we can not hardly have a theory, or certainly not know an answer. But how do they happen? I don't know, but I know it's not this.
Yeah. Karen and I have said over the years, and I know you've had many conversations with Karen too, because we're all in our small little circle with all this, but that becomes the bigger thing, doesn't it? The not knowing, or the discussing, well, we think it leads to this, we think it's kind of making us look in these areas, and so it may be about this, but we're not really sure, and we think there's a lot more to it, but we're only scratching the surface, and those kinds of things. it opens you up to how much you don't know rather than what you can be in any way certain about, which I think is great. And a lot of people, as you say, are uncomfortable with that, aren't they?
Yeah. They find it very hard to accept that the acceptance of the unknown.
Mystery.
Yeah.
Okay, so laid crop. Most people are familiar with this sort of postcard view of crop circles, which over the years, when I've given presentations, and most of my presentations sort of start with the first sort of 10 or 15 minutes of me saying, okay, this is why I think there's a mystery. And I usually give out three sorts of reasons, and one of those is the time frame, because most of them are made in sort of 5 hours of darkness at night, and it's very dark around the area, and to complete something without making any mistakes in that time, under those conditions in that time frame, would be very difficult. The second one is circles with no center, which you cover in the book, and the other one is the condition of the laid crop. Those three things, I think, stack up for me as raising enough doubt, reasonable doubt, for you to say, look, I don't think this is an enterprise that people could consistently do 7,000 plus times without making mistakes, especially under those conditions.
Yeah.
Laid crop is what your book's about, Layers of Mystery, great title. And you said you felt a calling to examine that, and you've pretty much stuck with that, haven't you? Right from sort of beginning of your research,
100%.
You've gone and taken these pictures.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you start off with kind of anomalies like animal nests. Tell me about that, when you first discovered an animal nest, and what impression it had on you.
I think it's just the fact that you're looking at a delicate item. That careful weaving of the sort of grasses by a mouse, in a spherical shape, but it's within the flattened crop. Can be flat to the ground, it can be 45 degrees, it can be even less of an angle than that, but it's contained within the stems that have been flattened in some sense. But in my experience, there's just you might then expect the harvest mouse nest to have taken some damage, but they seem like they haven't. And I think if you would never do it if you stepped on one. I think you'd see it would ruin it, it'd wreck it, wouldn't it? And
yeah,
I haven't seen tons of them, but I've seen a few. I think in the book the examples might be the was it the Eastfield? One of your favourites, yeah. And
one of my favourites. I was there
exactly,
for that one. Yes, that was quite a big one in my
very relevant
career. Yeah, yeah.
So there was one there, among many other things. There was one last year at Clay Hill in the big ring, a sort of circumpunct design, and it was within the ring of that, and
it was in the center, within the outer ring or the center
ring. Yeah,
the center.
No, in the outer ring.
The outer ring. Okay.
And it was, that the other bit of that is that it was right there as soon as I walked in. Almost the first thing I saw.
Okay.
Which you could well put that down to, more gently speaking, coincidence. I walked in a tram line, obviously, and there it was. But still, you could walk around that and not see it.
The chances you could have gone in any other tram line.
And that thing was big. There were a lot of tram lines crossing that. Yeah. So it's the sort of gentleness that I talk about a lot. The fact that it doesn't seem, in nearly all cases, it doesn't seem like a destructive mechanical force that has compacted all this. And an animal nest is a nice piece of evidence that can't have happened. In my opinion, it just can't.
Michael Glickman used to say that there's a respect for life.
Right. Yeah.
There was a formation at Silbury Hill. It was a sequence of squares that were iterated by smaller squares as it went out towards the edges. And there was a swirl of crop. And the whole thing was laid out over, a vast amount of area. But there was where the central circle of one of the sort of the wheat was swirled circular, even though it was inside a square. There was a standing thistle right in the centre that was just left there it's just a thistle, but it looked like it couldn't have been a coincidence that the whole thing was laid out with that one thistle just out on the edge in the centre of one of these smaller circles. You know what I mean? Yeah. So there it was, this respect for life, just this thistle, which looked beautiful because it got the purple buds and
Yeah. But the idea that the almost, it wasn't in the centre, was it? It was one of the outer squares, or outer. I think some circles as you got further out. Yeah. The idea that
as you got further out, there were the small. Yeah.
That almost the whole thing was positioned with that in mind. Isn't it? Yeah.
If it was in the centre of the big square, you could go, okay, they just decided to start from there. But because it was on one of the outer ones, and it was just perfect, perfectly. I'll dig a photo out of it because Michael did use it in one of his presentations once and said, this is, and that's where I learned from Michael about this issue of respect for life, which he also brought in with the hospitality portals as well. These gaps in the geometry that allow us to walk through without damaging the crop.
I should mention, Gary, that that photo is in the book. Andreas Müller's
with
photo.
The animal nest.
Yeah. The thistle.
The thistle. Yeah. Oh, it's in there, is it? Oh, I haven't come across that in your book. Oh,
Thistle
fantastic.
King's Castle, I think. Andreas Müller christened it.
Fantastic. Yeah. Okay. Then I shall put that up for the viewers to see, and with your, the photos that you've sent me, with your permission, I'll put these up so that people can see what we're talking about here, and then they can have a look at them in more glory in your book. Okay, that moves me on to then this other issue, which I've loved over the years as well, the basket weave, and I think is it Andreas's photograph of the basket weave at the 1999?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, exactly.
I know Ulrich Cox, an old researcher, German researcher, took some photographs of that as well. He used to be a guy that was on the scene back in the 90s.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that iconic first time it was ever seen. Weave. Yeah, before, many years, I'm afraid, before my involvement in it. But it stands the test of time, that image, doesn't it? And for lots of reasons. It really does.
Yeah, I'd been involved a couple of years then. So it was 2 years in. I always remember Michael commenting on one of his lectures about Matthew Williams said that he joined some other circle makers who were putting together those circles, and he just decided, because he had nothing to do, to just weave that stuff together because he was a bit bored.
I don't know that.
Yeah, that was what Michael used to say. It's quite an interesting. But I went to the Hackpen Hill formation and made a film for Mexican TV, the 2012, the big one. I think that's in your book. I've seen that in there. And there's another one that was along the A4 as well. I can't remember the exact location, that had a beautiful weave around it. I know that appears in your book as well. Talk me through your impression when you first walked into one with this basket weave all around it. How did it feel to you? What struck you most about it?
Well, I think whether the first time or the most recent, I just think it's mind-blowing every time. When you're looking at those swathes overlapping, it's you can't. Quite often you can make out a pattern, but quite soon you'll be lost in trying to figure out the order of it, if that's what you're trying to do. I just think, to imagine that happening, it's a very difficult thing to fathom. And if if I walked in one next week, I would find that just as difficult to fathom as I might have. Yeah, I can't remember actually the first one that I walked into that had that, but I think it's incredible, and the sort of layering that comes from that, because it's a difficult thing to accurately describe in words, isn't it? But that 90-degree angle that carries on and on and on means it's not just one layer over another, because there's something else that, the order is impossible, isn't it? And
yeah.
And I also love that way. Again, difficult to sort of summarize just in words without, because I would use my hands to sort of do this and this, but what I describe it as gap seeking, but in that situation it's not necessarily a gap, but the stems that are perpendicular on the edge are sort of swept into the flow of the stems that are flowing at 90 degrees to them underneath.
Yeah.
That's mental, isn't it? You can't God, I just feel like what that, with I do quite like the term gap seeking, even though that we're not describing a gap, but implied is implied in the word seeking. It's personification in a way, isn't it? But it implies a conscious decision to follow a different path for those stems to follow a different path from their peers, if you like, who are going straight. And then that's what I think it is. But there's no way of describing that in a more
it's difficult
way. That's what it feels like. It just wouldn't happen if you and I went to a field of wheat with a plank of wood and we laid some stems this way and then laid some others at 90 degrees. They would be where they lay. They wouldn't. Some of yours wouldn't follow some of mine, or the same the other way around.
No,
it just wouldn't happen.
No,
I love it.
But this all seamlessly goes together, doesn't it? I love it too. I really, really do.
The formation, the sort of hexagonal spiraling formation at Avebury. I want to say 2021. I think.
It was 2021.
That had something a little. I mean, essentially the same thing, but I felt that had something different, and it was more swirled. It was still the basket weave, but it was even more fluid than some of those, like Hackpen Hill, like some of the actual Hampton basket weaves. It felt I don't know, just felt a little bit more fluid. Felt slightly different, in a good way,
I was living in Mexico then, working for Jaime in this studio, and I remember when that formation happened. He used to do his stand-ups for television at 10 o'clock in the morning. He used to record the stand-ups for what was going to be on the show for that night's news, and then there would be a bit about the crop circles, and if we'd popped out for a coffee and we came back to the studio, I had to sort of stand as they finished that recording and then walk through the studio and quickly run through so that they could do the next take. And I'd seen that one appear. I'd seen the picture of it, and I've been to dozens of crop circles with Jaime and recorded lots and lots of shows for him over the years. And the trouble, I digress a little slightly here, but the trouble with ufologists to me is that they're always looking for evidence. It's always the next piece of evidence, right, that proves that they're not man-made. And when you get beyond that, it gets a little bit tedious to keep discussing that for me. And I never forget that formation. I walked through the studio after they'd stopped the last part of recording, and he said, "Have you seen the latest crop circle?" And I said, "Yeah, I've seen it. He said, "That can't be man." I rolled my eyes back in my head. I was just, oh God, can't we talk about something else? It's so beautiful. There's so much geometry in that crop circle.
Yeah. And a lovely alignment from there as well.
I guess that's sometimes you.
Well, a couple of alignments.
So you've done some work on these alignments.
In recent years.
Tell me.
Well, that one in particular, you could draw a line through. If you pointed a line at Avebury, just sort of directly at the village centre, so to speak, because you could draw 3 lines based on that hexagon through the center, and then through the vertices around the outside. And the first very close alignment was the cove stones, just within the stone, within the henge at Avebury, which obviously are not very far away, but it's worth noting that you can't see them from that field because the henge is so tall. So although they're right there, they're not visible.
Right.
And then when you extend that line further, it goes for however many miles, and you could extend it as long as you like, but eventually it hits the Devizes White Horse at Roundway Hill, bang on, and it's just a nice thing. How's that working out?
You've sent
I
me
don't
a
know.
picture of that, haven't you?
I sent no, that's a different one.
Oh no, that's the Roundway White Horse.
No,
you
that's
sent
the
me,
same White Horse, but a different formation hitting it. So that.
Oh, different alignment hitting it.
Same
okay.
horse.
Because that was only made in like 2000 for the Millennium.
Right,
That horse, wasn't it? That's quite a recent one.
Which I quite like the idea that's at least twice in the last 5 years or so that's been highlighted now by that formation, and another one at Roundway, which I probably was 22, I think. But they're direct hits on that horse. One from further away, Avebury, one from closer. But
I can see the line. Obviously, that's not coming from Avebury. That line that you've got here in this image, and it looks like you've ended the line at sort of where the horse's heart would be.
Yeah, it seems to go right through the sort of the centre of it.
Yeah.
And that line came from the Roundway formation. The reason I've included that in that selection of photos is the alignment was created by an anomaly in the flattened stems on the ground, rather than in the geometry. So whereas Avebury was an easy line to draw straight through the hexagon, at Roundway it was I think clockwise in the main centre, difficult to describe, but then there were two narrow pathways of sort of 6 to 8 inches wide of stems that weren't part of the clockwise flow. They were just sort of perpendicular to that flow. So then when you follow those, that's where you get the Roundway, the White Horse, the Devizes White Horse. Yeah. Which I'm fascinated.
And what do you make of this? Yeah, what do you make of it? I mean, I draw a connection between, like, my granddaughter. She's 2 now, okay, and one of the things that struck me when she was really, really just not long after she was born was that she would use this finger to point at things, like so many children do. But she was constantly pointing stuff, and and when you acknowledge that and you ask them what they're looking at, even though they're very little, but you acknowledge that they're pointing at something, and they get quite excited, and then we use that phrase, get to the point.
Yeah.
And point for us is quite important. So that's what kind of strikes me about these things when they line up, particularly over a long way, and they're pointing towards something. They're drawing our attention to something. But is there more to it than that, do you think?
Well, I don't know. I think sometimes, with any of the alignments that I've noted over say 5 years, the end result of following that, or sort of identifying it, following it, being amazed by the fact that it is pointing to something, because a lot of lines point to nothing in particular. I think for me the main outcome of that discovery is just the joy of how bloody magical it seems that's happened. Like it almost there's probably more, but just the fact that it's picked out that tiny single circle in mustard seed at the edge of Marden Copse over miles, many miles away, is unbelievable. And I think it's maybe, there probably is more, but for me, just knowing that's happened is another, like,
Is
another
enough.
and maybe a sort of I feel like this is I digress a bit, but it's probably just as relevant. But I've talked for lots and lots of years, mainly in lectures, about gifts for the visitor or for the viewer, but actually gifts for the sort of discoverer. So
Okay.
the gift is for anyone who sees it or wishes to receive it. It's not there's no ego to the gift. It's not for me, but it is for me because I've seen it, but it's also for you because you've seen it, or another 100 people who've noticed that thing on the ground. That it's the gift, but maybe only one of us sees it, and then we're the lucky receiver of the gift. But it's hard to describe. It's meant for us, but it's meant for anyone and everyone. And so, if you extend that theory, I believe quite strongly in that. And it's when I visited the second ever crop circle that I ever saw at something a week after the first one, and found the ring of single stems width flowing against all of the others on the very, very perimeter of that was a gift, and I was the lucky receiver of it. That was the calling. And maybe some of those alignments are the same thing. That if you are lucky enough, yes, you put a bit of time into these things, because that's what we do, because we're into it, and we it's a two-way process, isn't it? So that, yes, there's a bit of effort involved in it, but also then we're the receiver of the gift that says, yeah, you thought that, you were right, here it is, and it's exactly
I love
right.
that.
It's bang on. Some of those alignments are so precise that it's incredible when you track that line on Google Maps or however. It's phenomenal.
And then you get that rush.
Yeah.
I think it's the same for Robin Heath, isn't it? When Robin Heath he's lined up, the centre of Stonehenge with Lundy Island, and then drawn a vertical line up to the Pacelli Mountains, and then brought it back and found a 5, 12, 13 triangle. I mean, the joy he must have experienced when he discovered that. Yeah. It's just the same, isn't it? It's just that.
It's there to be.
You reminded me of
seen, but it's not very. It's far from obvious, isn't it? But
it's far from obvious. Yeah, I love that. It's a gift. As you know, I've taken many people to the crop circus over the years. I sort of became something of an impromptu guide, really, and then never advertised. I just used to get bookings every year for people to take me. And you and I think we did it for Karen one year, didn't we?
Yeah, the coach tours.
A bunch of pilgrims out on the buses, the coach tours. Yeah,
that's right.
Daniel was one of those. Do you remember Daniel? I've forgotten his surname. Please forgive me, Daniel, if you're watching the show. He was an ex-banker from London. He'd come out to the crop circles and just visited the conference. And he was on one of those buses that you and I took out. And I showed him the lay going opposite around the outside of a crop circle. We walked in. It was, there it was. Yeah. And I have to say, for you to notice that on your first or second crop circle, because a lot of people just they can spend years going into crop circles and they wouldn't notice that little detail, and that's why I certainly didn't notice it on my second one,
and that's why it felt like a calling. Exactly. I was and still am to this day really as amazed as anyone else would be at the fact that I saw it in the second one. I didn't know what I was looking for.
It's amazing. I'm amazed.
Yeah. That is a profound feeling.
It really is, isn't it?
Really, that because that led me into the research that I've done for over 20 years, yeah, it led to all of this, really.
Yeah, just finding that. And so what we should explain, shouldn't we, for the viewers that are not familiar with what we're talking about here. You walk into a crop circle and you walk up a tram line, and then you've got you encounter the laid crop, let's say, that's going from right to left. And that, let's say, that forms the big ring, like at Clay Hill, that could go, the circumference could be 800 feet or more in area, let's say, and it's all going clockwise, and you look up to the edge of the standing wheat where it meets the standing wheat, and you will find sometimes just one stem thick, sometimes it's a few, isn't it, that's going in completely the opposite direction, contra-flowing the main body of wheat. And it's not just on the edges, sometimes it's in the center of that laid crop that you'll find half a dozen stems, the 888 formation. People call them tracer lines, as if it's some sort of thing that people use to mark out the formation. But you go, okay, so you're going to spend hours just laying down one or two stems in the opposite direction,
tool? With what tool?
With what tool? Yeah, exactly. Just show me, please demonstrate to me how you would do that.
That's a fine piece of equipment, isn't it, to do that?
Isn't it? And meticulous, isn't it, as well? And so when you discover that is one of those gifts, isn't it?
100%, yeah. And I think it's one of the hardest things to see. I haven't seen it that much. And they're probably, like you, as you described that now in the 888, I didn't see it there, I don't think,
Yeah, it's running through the centre.
You see it or you don't, like there's like a lot of things.
Yeah. So my first crop circle was in 1997 on the 11th of July. It was the Taurus knot that was in Southfield, just opposite Eastfield. The guy who took me there showed me how the crop was laid over. It wasn't one of these tracer lines, but he showed me, he lifted up one layer going in that direction and lifted up another layer and lifted up another layer. And it was that fathoming out for, okay, where did this begin then? Which, because it's all been done with some sort of plan. Otherwise it would be a mess because of all the different intersections. So, that went down with some thought in over this vast area, and it all looked so beautiful. And then when you lift these layers up, and then over the years, then I went to one along Ogbourne St George, and I walked in, and Janet Ossabard was there, God bless her, and she said, "Gary, come over here and look at this." And we were just lifting up layers, and there were like 8 or 9 layers going in different directions in just one of those circles. It's a joy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and if you get sucked into sort of to lifting those, and if you've got time when you're there to start thinking about where this bit came from and the order. I've done that a fair few times, because sometimes you just get into it, don't you? You notice that there are quite a few. And I would say there's never been a time, having done that quite a lot of times, I've never concluded with anything other than it's impossible because this one has to go first, but it can't because that one goes first. And so does that. And then you end up with a minimum of 2 that had to be laid first, but they can't have been, and that's every time.
Every time. It's bewildering.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Oh, it's good. It is good to do it when you're in it. That's part of the joy of it, isn't it? On your hands and knees, and it's marveling at the physicality of it. You can touch it. You're lifting it up, and then right before your eyes is the evidence of something. You're handling something that is impossible, and I don't think there are many things in this world that are so tangible, literally tangible. We're lifting it up, and it reveals impossibility right there, right there, right for us to touch and see and photograph and think about. It's right there.
Yeah. And I say this, and I give interviews, and people say to me, talk about aliens and UFOs, and I'm interested. I'm interested, right? But to me, they're fuzzy lights in the sky mostly, and people talking about could this be this, could this be that. Crop circle. I'm a crop circle guy. You're a crop circle guy. We go into these things, and there they are. You can walk in them. You can touch them. You can demonstrate that here is an impossibility right in front of you. Whether it's a circle that's not got a center, or whether it's layer after layer that you can't fathom out. It's absolutely impossible to fathom out how it was first laid down. It's there. It's physical, and that's why I think I hold some skepticism, you see, towards all this UFO disclosure stuff, because the people that are doing it still don't want to talk about crop circles, even though there's an abundance of evidence that suggests we're dealing with something that's mysterious. They don't want to go there. It's strange to me, that is, because there it is, you know. So I'm not skeptical about UFOs and aliens. I'm skeptical about some of the way that disclosure's being handled, and that some of the people who are involved in it won't discuss crop circles. Bent nodes. I've got a bit of a love-hate relationship with bent nodes, because the litmus test for some people with regards to crop circles has been if it's got bent nodes, then it must be genuine. And you know, you talk about phototropism, and you've mentioned this in the book. What's your take on bent nodes?
I think when I've seen them and it is evident to me that they're not phototropism, because they're bent, and it's, you know, perhaps underneath a whole load of other flattened stems. They're bent sideways. They clearly haven't grown back up towards the sun. On occasions that I've seen that, I think it would be pretty hard to argue that there's any mechanical flattening of that. You know, we know that can't be done.
It breaks.
It's an impossible thing. But you don't see them in every formation. And so do I think that the only time I'm seeing genuine crop circles, genuine as in mysterious crop circles, is when they're bent nodes? Not a bit of it. I just
Me neither.
And I think that's where you know, perhaps people who place too much emphasis on the bent node, it perhaps drives a bit of skepticism about lots and lots of formations that we see that don't have them, but I would absolutely think are genuine, because that is
me too.
You don't see them in, I would say, in the majority. I believe the majority are mysterious in their creation.
That's why I say I got a bit of a love-hate relationship, because I think people need, and it's very telling. Again, it's that mirror back to us, isn't it? Where I think people need something to grab hold of that says this is fairly concrete.
It's strong evidence,
and you talk about Etchelhampton, the big cross that's got the. I didn't know that, Dan.
Right.
Until I read it in your book, okay, that particular one had the flexible nodes,
sort of softened,
softened nodes. I didn't know that.
I just don't know. I don't know about it. You know, it seems like a rare thing. And
I'd never heard of it before, and I'd never seen it until I saw it in your book.
I feel like I've seen it in one other place, but that might have been Etchelhampton as well. But I can't remember. I should remember what I've written in my own book, but I feel like I've seen it one other time, but to a lesser degree, in a similar area. But it was
Etchelhampton's got this kind of, it gets visited a lot, doesn't it? You know, you've got those other beautiful formations where I jump a little bit here, but you're getting into that other formation that had all those sort of not basket weeds, the nests that were not the animal nests, but what did you call them?
What the sort of 3D, 3D structures within
Yeah, the sort of 3D structures in the centre of that circle. I remember it from about 2014, I think, in Etchelhampton, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's
Where you've got these kind of like corn dollies where it's tied together, and then you've got these kind of nests, and you can put your hand under them as if they are sort of nests, really, where there's a little alcove, and you can, it's as if something could go inside it and things like
often
that.
they are.
I'll show pictures for the viewers to see
Yeah,
here, but
yeah.
yeah. So Etchelhampton's got this air. It's one of those areas where things like this seem to happen quite a lot, don't they?
Yeah. It's seen a lot of formations, hasn't it? And in recent years, including this year, we find ourselves there. I don't know. Is it? Perhaps more often, consistently now than any other place, probably in the last few years. In sort of broadly speaking, in that area, anyway.
And people say, obviously, the farmer there's always been kind of open and allowed people to go in, and he's not, he's let people go onto the land to conduct night watches with cameras, and he's a friendly guy. And so it's, for me, I take it that the mysterious whatever it is visits there because it kind of knows that its work isn't going to be cut out immediately, even though it does put things in fields where they do get cut out immediately, and probably, it's aware that that's going to happen. We usually get a photograph but don't get a chance to visit.
Yeah.
So it is a very temporary temple, as Karen would put it, but Etchelhampton gives us that opportunity to go and spend some time and hang out. And I've had some incredible coincidences, in particularly at Etchelhampton. I talked about it in one of my podcasts recently.
Yeah,
with Janet and Randall.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a strange. Yeah, you have to watch the podcast. I won't go through the story now, but yeah, it's strange things happen. You know what it's like.
It's a really good place.
Yeah. Something else you talk about is the crimping experiment. These little white lines. Okay. Talk me through that.
Well, is it a bit?
Describe it first of all, so people can know what we're talking about here.
In green, unripe wheat and barley, if you fold that stem, often it will create a little. It's very hard to describe it any other way than it. Very, very narrow fold mark, but which is white, where the stem has been white. I suppose where the surface of the stem has been damaged by its fold, not necessarily broken, but certainly damaged. And I think this is an aspect almost at the same time similar to bent nodes and the opposite of bent nodes, in that some people would say if you see those little white lines, the sort of crimp marks, so to speak, if they're there, it's evidence of a wooden board hitting the stems, crushing them down. And so in this way, it's almost the opposite of the bent node. That's, people might say that's the only evidence. This is evidence that it's got to be man-made. Whereas I've seen those marks, perhaps a dusting of them, metaphorically speaking, in formations that I felt very, very confident were genuinely mysterious. Yet some stems here and there might exhibit a little bit of that type of damage. So I don't, like bent nodes, I do not think it is a definitive way to judge the origin of the crop circle because of the presence of these. I think the experiment that you're referring to, it was quite early on in my crop circle journey. I think it was 2005, and probably the reason it fits there better than after that is because my oldest son was born in 2006, so I have more time on my hands.
Okay.
The year before that, probably.
Okay.
I think at the time I talked with Karen a little bit about whether, the theory was, can I use a plank to flatten some wheat without creating those marks? I suppose that's what I was sort of getting at. So not a lot of science in it, but some control of the variables, in that I I don't know, it seems unrealistic now, but Tim Carson himself sent me a bag of about a kilogram of wheat that was going to be planted in Eastfield that year. So it's absolutely amazing. So one control variable was the seed was the same as in Eastfield. So I grew this patch of wheat in the allotment, very small, maybe 5 meters square or something, my own little field.
Okay.
And then I stomped it all down with a plank of wood. And one section, Karen's suggestion was, what if we wrapped bubble wrap around the plank? Would it, just to soften the edge so it's not that harsh, sort of 90-degree piece of wood. So I did one swathe, just wood, one swathe, just bubble wrap, with the bubble wrap. And the conclusion was that I couldn't squash it down without creating the white lines. They were very much present there. So it didn't really, like a lot of things, didn't really provide me any evidence other than, to sort of confirm.
If you use a board, you make these white lines. If you use a board,
you make the lines. So if you don't see any lines, my limited bit of investigation tells me if there aren't those lines, that hasn't been flattened with a board. So it does count for something. In the sense of the fact that quite a lot of early season formations in that lush barley and green wheat don't have any of those lines, do they? That's the fact. We've talked about finding them here and there, a little bit, couple of pockets of the white lines sometimes, but in so many formations that we've been to over so many years, there's not a bit of it, not a single bit. And you lift up stems that are around the edges, and see just that they are in perfect condition, just bent at the base, and the rest is absolutely untouched, apart from by the rest by its the stems around it. So there was some purpose in that, but again, as we're saying, it's not a litmus test, if that's the right term for proving that it's not not genuine.
We're coming up on an hour, and I want to keep these episodes to an hour. So I want to, if it's all right with you, sort of like wrap up here and do an episode 2.
Of course. Oh yeah. Well, God, we could talk for as many hours as we've got.
Well, yeah. I think we'll, if it's all right with you, we'll carry on recording, but I'll just sort of like, for the viewer, wrap this up now with the first hour, and then we'll maybe carry on and do some bits, because there's a bunch more stuff I want to ask you. But let's wrap up this hour with you. You mentioned that in the book about, and something that I've said over the years, about people tend to, when they visit crop circles, walk in the same sort of area. They usually walk in the center of the park, don't they? And so you said in the book, I read this part this morning, and I've got lots of photos of this, where, that people will walk down and they walk down a little sort of pathway down the center of this sort of a meter wide area of crop that's laid down in front of them. And after a week or so, you revisit the crop circle, and that part where everybody's walked is all dead and trampled. But all the areas to the left and right of that are still sort of buoyant. Some of it's popped back up due to phototropism, but it's all still undamaged without the white lines. And I've always said, well, if somebody trampled that with boards, why wouldn't that be dead anyway? Because they would have been walking around and trampling on it. And that seems to me to be something that, again, stares you in the face as something that's impossible.
Yeah. Once you walk on it, you see the evidence of the walking on it, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah. Now, okay, so I want to wrap up now, but I want to come back at the beginning of episode 2 with this issue of crop that's been. So I want to bring up the crop circle that's what we call the lobsters, where you had it appear in 2 stages, which for a lot of people says, oh, it's got to be man-made because they did it over a couple of nights, right? But with that formation, some of the crop stood back up again, having been laid down before.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's my little teaser. That's my little teaser now for episode 2 of what we're going to do.
It's a great feature.
So let's end.
Yeah. And little discussed, I think. Hardly.
It really is. It really is. And have you got more examples of that?
At least one. There are others, but one significant one. Yeah.
Okay, that's fantastic. Well, so let's end episode 1 here, and then I'll ask the viewers to come back to episode 2, where we're going to start talking about really crazy stuff, where crop gets laid down in stage 1 of the formation, and then we find it's gone back up again in stage 2. Dan, thanks very much for joining me, mate.
Thank you.